So today I'm going to be doing a video on the game Come Deliverance and how to optimize a lot of gameplay and combat. It's a little bit different from a game like Fallout or the Elder Scrolls because you don't necessarily have like a scaling health stat, and you don't necessarily have like weapon or enchantments because it's supposed to be a historically realistic game. A lot of the mechanics that you'd expect, like skills buffing your damage or stuff like that, don't factor in. There are perks, but they don't have necessarily the same effect in the game. Suffice to say, it's supposed to be like a realistic combat game, and your main perks are perks related to like weapon combos, which you don't necessarily use. But nonetheless, I'll be going over some of the ways that your character can fight well and how to really defeat enemies. And I'll show a montage of enemies getting killed at a random encounter site. So the first thing I want to discuss is how you start out with your character and you have your town of Skalitz get destroyed. And you run to Talmberg, then you pay respect to your family that died there. And you almost end up getting killed, and you're taking a rate, ultimately. What happens in this game is that you're initially weak, and you can't really fight anybody well. You've got your bare fists. Sometimes you can get, like, base level weapons, like clubs, by default, that are given to you when you're doing like guard duty for Ratai. But to really up your game, there are a few methods that are pretty effective. First of all, you should go to the captain of the Ratai guard, and you can train with him up in the eastern section past the big keep at the end of the town. And you basically are supposed to just train with him until you can get your skills good. And for this, it is somewhat recommended to try to get good armor. A way you can get good armor is to find a weapon that is like, just any old sword can work. But you can find spears off of enemies. And you take your sword, you go and either buy a horse or maybe even steal one out of stealth. Go to a random encounter spot and race back and forth on your horse and spear enemies with whatever weapon you have, or slash. By doing that, you can quickly get good armor if you come across an encounter that has like high level knights. I'd call them robber barons or Raubritter in German. Basically, they're these like wealthy kind of mercenary, maybe petty nobility, because how do they have armor like that otherwise? Armor is one of the most expensive things you could have, quality plate armor. So you go and you basically come and strafe at them with your horse, and if you go fast enough and you strike right, they can't get you. Once you get a good quality set of armor, you can go to the captain in Ratai and train with him and use like training swords and stuff like that, and continually attack, block, and it's a grueling effort, but getting through all of his parries, you can eventually get your strength up to 20, you can get your sword skill up to 20, and other skills you might want, like mace or axe. I think sword is the best, and then the axe is maybe second best of those two. And the mace is probably the third best, because the mace doesn't really have... There are items like the Raven's Beak that do well for stabbing, but stabbing can make an opening. And the axe, the metal-plated battle axe, has a spike on the end of it. So, you want to have maybe your sword up at 20 to use like a long sword and get good stabs in, because eventually you could get the St. George's sword if you lockpick it from a certain place in Ledechko Forest. you can basically get a really good sword, the best one in the game, for like stabbing. And if you do stabbing, you can punch through plate armor and basically smash right through it. For melee, though, you want to use a long sword with no shield, because it's unwieldy to use that long sword with a shield. You don't have full control of your hands, and you need that fluidity because of the weight of the sword. There is the opportunity to do different things in the game, like attack people with stealth, which is a very effective way, or even if you find like a cumin camp, you just go up to them before they can react and ambush them and start striking out of the combat rows, which is like the 5-pointed kind of pentagon that you use to attack. So you can use like ambush or stealth tactics, and those are ways you can get good armor or advance past the limitations of whatever you have currently. But you can also just attack directly and enjoy the challenge of risking dying, because you don't have as many good skills once you're at like a middling level of like an overall composite of your combat abilities. At the beginning, you're almost certainly screwed unless you've got like, you know, a really weak enemy you're fighting and you've got a shield or something like that to help you. Let's assume now that you get every single combat-oriented skill for melee, like attributes like strength, warfare, defense, and sword, if you're going to use a sword, axe and mace, respectively. If you get those all done with the training, you can still use bows. Bows are kind of like the black sheep of the game, and they're quite tricky. There are a couple ways you can use them. You can almost use them in a funny way, like having a long bow and being standing and being right in front of somebody. You're not engaged with the combat ruse, but you're just pelting these long distance arrows right into somebody. The other option is to use them on horseback, which is quite broken. But the problem with the game is that where you expect the arrow to shoot from to line up with like the angulature of the shaft does not correspond to where it actually goes. If you're thinking it's going to be the center of the screen, it's actually slightly below. And the only way to test this would be to shoot arrows at a tree, see where they land, and then maybe put tape on your screen. Or if you're on PC, just use like a reticle and put a marker on the tape to give yourself kind of like an imaginary reticle. You know, it might be kind of cheesy to use a bow like that and have a piece of tape on your screen to denote, or even modding in a reticle, which might be even cheesier to determine where your arrow is going to go. It's just because in the game, it doesn't just seem to really line up as to where you'd expect. But you could probably take the piece of tape and focus your eyes in and get kind of like a muscle memory for how you should be oriented with the way you're looking at the screen. And then if your line of sight is focused in that position and it's over an enemy, you should be able to hit them that way too. Now, you do have to understand that at longer distances, even small, mistakes or angles that are slightly off for what you expect an arrow is supposed to go and where it actually goes, small discrepancies can make it impossible to shoot an enemy, right? So that's the main thing to consider. But if you have some sort of reticle, then it makes archery a lot easier, and that's how I'm doing it in the video. Anyway, with that, you can just use your horse and run around at full speed and basically skirt and avoid all enemies and use kind of like Scythian or cumin type tactics where you're just riding around a horse and nobody can catch you and you're pelting them with arrows. So we've established that horse archery is incredibly broken, because it gives you total latitude and you control the battlefield and you can just shoot on point. You can't really shoot due to the way the game's designed while moving, or aim while moving too much like you might think the Mongols did, because the game starts to rapidly use up your stamina when you do that, and then your bow starts to shake and you just can't get a steady shot at anything. But the way it works in this case should suffice, because the enemies are all on foot and they don't have the latitude you do, and it takes them long to get to you. Now, nonetheless, horse archery is not the only way to go. You can also take like a cataphract style and use spears or pole arms to run enemies in while on a horse. This is a way, if you get a feel for it and you know when to time it, you can just strafe at enemies and hit them, and it's an incredibly powerful way to do things. Unless you get dismounted by an enemy, like getting you with a pole arm, or you move in too slow and they somehow get you, or a cuman's bow shot knocks you off, you're pretty much set to just go in and race on horse with like a spear, and then just like go in for like a lunge at somebody. They really can't get you, and they can't even block or anything. Attacking from horse in that sense is quite overpowered. So those are two ways of doing it. What about fighting like a dragoon? Well, you can see in this video, I use the horse to give me good positioning against multiple enemies, and then sometimes to make it more fair, that I'm not just like being cheesy and like using my horse too much as an advantage, I just put myself away from them. Then I get out of combat and I use these 3 potions. One's called Aqua Vitalis, one's called Buckskin Blood, and one is called Bevoy's Rage. And Aqua Vitalis halves the number of damage you get. So if you're going to get like 20 points of hit points loss, you only get 10. And then that stacks in a sense with Buckskin Blood, because it gives you 50% more stamina for 10 minutes. The other one does it for 5. And stamina is huge in regular melee combat, because stamina allows you to block any health loss from hits, as long as like spatially or physically you're not hit in an exposed area, or you didn't do something like stupid that caused you to not be able to block, like they got an opening on you. Other times they can do stuff like a master strike and totally, overcome your stamina. But most of the time, stamina can help you and keep you safe from dying against really skilled knights that will kill you. You want to have more stamina when going up against fierce enemies that are numerous. It's worth noting that bows from like human archers can penetrate right through your armor, but nonetheless, you just have to like find ways to deal with that. Once you progress through the game, you get the Cuman Killer perk, which will make them die faster. So you can also position yourself and have like one Cuman in front of you, and then have like the archer behind you, and then the archer will accidentally hit the Cuman instead.